Mixing the Flying Nun with Audacity. What does that mean? All right. Well, what we're going to do today is use a song called The Flying Nun. And I just got confirmation that everybody's okay with us using this. So always get permission for when you use audio files, when you use anything that's copyrighted. But today we're going to be using Audacity, and I thought, hey, this is a very real world uh, uh, scenario that you can apply. This is going to be rough tracks that that need help. You can't just hit go and have a good sound out of it. So we're going to use Audacity today, and what we're going to be using. The actual audio files are from a session I did a couple years ago with a group called Silver Spoons, and they were all UTM alum now. I think they've all since graduated, but at the time they were still in school, and it's just something. They came out to the studio one day and did some tracking, and this is one of the songs that they did. So I thought, oh, this would be great. Just some raw tracks for you to play with. So at the time you see this, I will have these available for you on our drive, our shared drive, Google Drive folder. So you can download them. They'll be under Silver Spoons. That's the name of the group, and the Flying Nun. So we're just going to assume that you're good with that. Okay. So I'm going to I have already downloaded from Google Drive. I'm assuming you're good with that much, right? I have a directory for me called Silver Spoons. Under there, I have the Flying Nun. And here are all of the tracks. Now you'll notice the naming scheme on all of these. This is very computer generated from this. I used Cubase to record it, but whenever I exported track by track, it added the name in there, the revision, and then track export. So if you want, just for simplicity's sake, to clean all this up, you may want to just go through there and change the name of all these files to where it's simply kick, snare, OHL, which stands for overhead left, OHR, which stands for overhead right, and so forth. Or you can leave them as they are. But it might be worth the time to do that. So I'm going to go ahead, and if you're on a Windows machine, I know this is elementary, but sometimes I've encountered this a few times. People say, how did you just do that? So I'm going to keep this very basic. If you're on Windows, and this doesn't apply to Mac, but if you're on Windows, you can select the file, and after you select it, click it again. Don't double click. Click it twice with spaced out, and it allows you to highlight it and then change the name and then hit return. Ta-da! Now that long name is truncated down to just kick. Or once I have a file selected, I can hit the F2 button on my keyboard, rename the file, and then I'm using my arrow key. I use right arrow key, then left, and delete all that. Okay, so there's two ways to do it. Now, I'm going to be doing a lot of these. Sometimes I have to do lots of file renaming. So I double selected it. I hit my right arrow key, left. Now I'm holding down Control and Shift on my keyboard and moving left. Bam. Delete it. And rather than clicking anywhere else, I'm just hitting Tab, and it goes to the next one. So every time I hit Tab, it leaves this file naming, goes to the next one, okay? So, I missed, I went over one. Instead of hitting Tab right now before I go to the next one, I'm going to hold down Shift and hit Tab. And it goes the opposite direction. Now Tab. And there's all sorts of ways to do this. Now, if you were doing like literally thousands of files, there's a renaming software, or you could go write a script for it that will go through this and rename everything. But, you know, for our purposes, there's what, 13 tracks. Yeah, that was the simplest way for me. So I've taken the name, stripped it down. This will make it a lot easier for me to use. I've had a lot of sessions. I've been given just WAV files, and they're all numbered, and there's absolutely nothing. I have to go through track by track, listen to it, figure out what it is, what it goes with, and then put it together. Time consuming. So we've got all of our names changed, and I'm going to go to Audacity, which you have already downloaded and installed, right? Okay, so this is basically what you should get. Audacity, you open it up out of the box. If you don't like this little pop-up screen, just click Don't Show This Again at Startup. But until I feel pretty comfortable with a piece of software, I leave this startup screen as a reminder, like, oh yeah, there's some good, handy resources ready for me. So I'm just going to leave it up for now. And like most software, if you're like me, like most people, you're going to, if you use a bit of software, you probably have like 5 to 10 functions that you use repeatedly, and there's like 90 some odd % of the software you don't use at all and you never get acquainted with it. That's just the norm. Find out what you can do with it, and just expect that's all you'll probably ever do with it, and be fine with that. I know it's daunting learning new software sometimes. It's like, oh, it does so much. Yeah. Even the gurus out there don't know every bit of software that they use. There's very, very few, that if any. So I've opened Audacity. The easiest way to bring in your files is simply select all of them, drag them in. Now, as you'll notice, all my files now are in alphabetical order. That's not so great for me. The beauty to the naming scheme I had before I changed them was that there was a number preceding each unique name, such as kick, snare, bass, guitar, all that stuff, that kept them in order. That number came first, and it was in sequence that way. Now my bass is first and my guitar second, and that's fine. It doesn't hurt anything, but I personally like, just because I have my habits, I always put my kick on top, my snare after that, then my overhead left and overhead right from the drums, and then any toms if I have them, or a room mic, and then my bass, guitar, vocals, and anything else from there. And of course, when we get in having horns and vocals and all that stuff, so they go further down that list. There's kind of a history as to why that's the case, and a lot of older engineers do that because they learned on tape, and we didn't have computers, so we got into these habits. You don't have to do them, but sometimes it makes it easier. So you can take your tracks and move them around however you want to. Like I said, I like my kick to be on top, so I'm going to put it up on top. Whoa, almost made it there. Bam. Now, I have a few more tracks. I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll down to look for more tracks. There's a bunch there. They're more than my screen. So I want to get all my tracks on the screen so I can just, for a little bit of cleaning, I can literally go to between each track and resize it to my liking, which is really handy when you really want to look at a track up close. But I can do this. This is going to take a while, especially if I have like 20, 40 tracks. So I'm on my keyboard, again on Windows, Control-Shift-C, and it just brings all my tracks down to their minimal display height. If you're not on Windows, these menus should still be the same. So I can go to View, Track Size, and Collapse all tracks. And you'll see right here, Control-Shift-C is my shortcut. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. You learn like 5 or 10 things to use in a bit of software. If it has a shortcut, learn it, because it will save you so much time. This software and a lot more software every day gives you the ability to write your own macros, which is assign your own hotkeys and do things like that. So if I didn't particularly like Control-Shift-C as my my command to collapse all tracks, what I could do is just change it to something else that makes more sense. I'm a fan of using defaults because when I go from machine to machine, I don't want to have to like either relearn that machine or reprogram all the software. Here also, to expand collapsed tracks, Control-Shift-X. On Mac, it's probably something like Command-Shift-X or something like that. And if you work with Mac, you probably know the translations that usually have to happen. So again, I'm going to Control-Shift-X, Control-Shift-C, expand them, contract them. All right, so going back to my my maintenance here, my kick. My purposes, I like to take my snare. It didn't let me grab it. This is a feature I honestly just don't use too much in Audacity. Normally, by the time I'm using Audacity, I've got other things going on. Well, it's not very happy with me today. I've got a lot of software running to record this. So while I'm doing all this, I'll say kick, snare, overhead. And my overheads, I usually have a left and right overhead. I'm just going to move that down out of the way. The reason the kick is usually first is because literally the sound, the waveform, when you're recording on tape, the waveform was such a big low frequency wave that on tape you have side by, like literally it's physically all one strip of material, and if a sound is too loud, it creates a magnetic field. That's how tape works, and that magnetic field might actually affect the tracks beside it. So if you had your kick track next to your vocal track, you might get some kick literally bleeding over onto your vocal track. So you wouldn't put those two together. But if your kick bleeds over onto, say, your snare track, that's fine, because the microphone, the kick microphone, is picking up some of the snare, and the snare microphone is picking up some of the kick. That's just a matter of being so close together. So there's a little tidbit there. I'm still setting all this up. My overhead right, I'm going to drag it up just by my overhead left. And my computer is running slow right now with all this going on. And then by toms. Now, if you're watching this and you're like, okay, get on with it. Depending on where you're watching it right now, usually like on YouTube, if you don't know this, click that little gear down at the bottom for preferences, and you can watch things and double speed. I think 1 1/4, 1 1/2, and 1 3/4 and double speed. Saves so much time watching videos out there. Okay. Now I'll do the rest as we go, so we're not sitting here waiting for yours truly to get all these tracks in here. It is just not letting me drag them. If you see where I'm clicking, it's right there in that little clear box. Okay, all right. So I have my kick, snare, and so forth the way I like them. Now, if you were pulling in files one at a time, you might get to the point you might have brought something in and it didn't line up with everything else. Well, you have different tools up here in Audacity. So this one right here at the top is a little left-right arrow looking thing. It's called the time shift tool. And if you see, when I mouse over it, I get a flyout that says F5. That's a quick way to select that tool. I can just hit F5, right? But that would allow me to grab a track and change where it is in time. And now I've got this track started at the completely wrong time. I'm hitting Control Z, just undo. The best thing to do when you're doing a project like this, if you have all your tracks, bring them all in together. If they all started recording at the same time, they'll all be lined up. If not, you'll have to manually move them around to get them in time. That's a very terrible way to approach this. It's best if you can bring all your files in simultaneously, all with the same start time. There's nightmares if it's not. So I'm going to go through, and let's just jump into it here. I'm going to go to my kick track. I'm going to expand it and go back to my regular tool here, which is what they call the selection tool, F1. And I'm going to select this track, and let's just listen. We haven't even listened yet. Let's listen. Okay, I hit start and stop with my space bar. That will start the cursor moving, the playback head, and it'll stop it as well. If I want to start somewhere, say here, I literally just put my cursor there and click. But right now we're hearing all the tracks at basically wide open volume. I don't like that. I can't work like that. I have to select a track, and I want to solo this track out. I can hit solo, and now that's just the kick track. So you can obviously hear some more of the drums. You hear the snare and some of the ride cymbal going on there. Overall, kick track's a little on the weak side. And I'm going to zoom in. I'm holding down Control, and I'm rolling my mouse wheel. I can scroll in and look at the actual wave. Scrolling back out. I want to reset that. I've changed some of my preferences. Where's the... oh, here it is up here. So you see where I moused over at the very top. There's a magnifying glass. Fit the project to the window. It just automatically zooms in to where the project, the beginning and end of it, is within your window. Very handy to have. So we're right here on the kick track. I'm going to go through, and I still have it soloed. So first of all, I can just look at it and say, you know what, I can just bring the whole thing up to have a better wave file to work with. So I double click, and it selects that whole track. In Audacity, whatever effect you apply only gets applied to what's selected. So I could actually, what I'm about to do, only affect part of the track if I wanted to, but for obvious reasons that will about to come up, we're going to double click it and select that entire track. The effect, I'm going to amplify, literally change the amplitude of the wave. And one of the beautiful features it has here is I can either type in the amplitude I want or where I want the peak amplitude to be. And it will automatically go through and find it for me. So I'm just going to leave it there at 0, hit OK. And depending on your how fast your machine is and what all you have running, it might take a minute, but that was almost instantaneous. So now let's listen to it louder. All right. So the first thing I might do is just go through and do that with all of my tracks. I'm going to go through and listen to them. I'm going to go to my snare track, listen to it. Okay. And so forth and so on. Now, when we get down here for drums in particular, we could spend a whole semester talking about how to mix just drums. There's people whose only job in the recording industry is just mixing drums. They don't touch anything else in the band because there's a lot to it. But I'm going to my overhead left. And my overhead right. So these two tracks, just peeking forward, by virtue of the name, you can probably guess, they're going to be panned left and right. So whenever we do have a mix, these are not going to be up the middle, dead center. They're going to be panned left or panned right, and that's the term we use in audio. So these tracks, the way we pan them is we can, sorry, I'm grabbing the gain. I could pan it left and pan it right. So over here on the left, pan right. Okay. So now when we have these, when we listen to our playback for our drums, this is everything. Our left and right overhead tracks are panned left and right. So before we go any further, we've already hit an instance where soloing is not great. We actually need to hear two tracks at once. I'm going to go to my mixer because it's really hard to adjust all my tracks intuitively right here with this volume and this fade, the panner. So I'm going to view my mixer board. Okay, so this is my mixer board. The cool thing about Audacity is if it recognizes one of the words that you've used to name your track, it goes ahead and puts a little image in there for you. I like that. You can change it. I never do. I forget how you change it, honestly, but it's pretty handy to be able to just look up and go, oh, bass, there's guitar, there's keys. So I'm going to go to my overhead left and right, which don't get a special icon because it doesn't know what OH is. I've got them pan left and right. I'm going to just go through real quickly and pull everything down. Now, if I want, I can double click on that little fader button and type in something. So -60. I'm going to do that for all of these. -60. -60. And that'll just make them so quiet. They're not, I can still hear them, but they'll be out of the way. Now, I could alternatively just go through and mute the ones I don't want to hear. So that's another method you could use. Whatever you want to do. You probably find out like everybody else, like everywhere, whenever you play around with it, you find the ways that you like to do things, and you know what works for you. That's great. Experiment. Okay, so that's our predominantly our left and right overhead tracks, which are also quiet. So I'm going to put this mixer board away, and I'm going to double click my overhead left track. Go to amplify. I'm not going to repeat amplify, which is an option, because it keeps whatever your last thing that you did and says, oh, you may want to repeat that sometimes, and it just keeps it locked and loaded. But this will need to amplify a different amount. So I'm going to hit amplify after I've selected the track, and it says 12.192. I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to look at the other track and hit amplify Ah, see, that one's different. So had I amplified one track and I want to amplify them both the same amount, if I'd used the overhead left track and applied it to the overhead right track amplitude, I would have ended up with a kind of an unbalanced signal. Actually, I would have clipped this signal, overmodulated. That means distortion. So we don't want to do that. Now, for our purposes here, though, it's probably just as well to use the standard amplify and then double click the other track. If I would right now said repeat, that's when I would get distortion, because it would amplify by the same amount that it amplified the last time. So if that makes sense. If it doesn't, ask me and let's talk about it. So I'm going through and making all the tracks a little bit louder. I'm going to go ahead and do the snare track too. I haven't done it. Now you notice already I'm doing an effect, a command over and over and over, and it requires that I go through, double click this track, go to my effects menu, go down to amplify, hit OK, and let it apply. Well, wouldn't it be simpler if I just simply assigned a key to do that? So this is one of those cases where you're going to do the same function over and over. Go ahead and change that. So my keyboard, I'm going to search for amplify. So there's amplify. I'm going to say I want it to be A. I'm going to hit set. Now if I hit A, it's going to apply the amplify effect. Okay, so let's try it out. I'm going to double click Tom, which may not have even used that track. It doesn't look like. Now let's go into bass. Apparently, well, I am doing the tom. I'm just going to see what happens. Yeah, there's nothing. Oh, yeah, there is a very. We apparently didn't use that track. He didn't use a third tom. But just to be sure, I'm going to solo it out. Listen to it. Yeah, that's just a bad track. So, tom 3, don't need it. I'm going to come over here, this little X. Boom. Get rid of it. No sense in messing with it, right? So now let's go to, where are we at? We were on bass. And I'm going to solo it out, which I remember is Shift S. Put my cursor just somewhere randomly and hit spacebar. Very quiet. So I'm going to double click, hit A, amplify. All right, that's much improved. So I'm going to go through and just continue doing this. Bring them all up to where their peak amplitude is 0. Now, peak amplitude of 0 means you might be used to thinking of 0 as the least you can go. Well, in the audio world, especially the digital audio world, 0 is what we consider maxed out. There's obviously exceptions that we're going to see where you go above 0, but 0, that means it's nothing's left. It's completely open signal coming through there. Anything less than that is measured negatively. So we want to come down by decibel units. That's how we measure the strength of sound, is decibels. Double selecting the track, hit A, okay. And vocal track, hit A. So yeah, so decibels, we won't go into exactly how the formulas of how you measure decibels and all that, but essentially it is how loud something is. And in the audio world, 0 is just, it's wide open. We're not restricting anything. We're just letting the signal flow through unimpeded. If we pull it back, then we work with negative decibels. So we pull things down. You think of mixing audio as taking out what you don't need rather than putting in what you do. It's kind of a different concept. Now I'm going through here and I realized that my room mic, I think of generally as a drum mic. So I'm going to put it up under my tom. So all my drums are together. Sometimes a room mic is picking up the whole band if the band played live, but sometimes the drums are in a different room or the drums perform their part alone and everybody else goes and performs their part alone, one at a time, and they overdub. You know, there's only one instrument playing at a time. In this case, I do believe I'm going to select my room and solo it from E Shift S. And I'm going to listen just to a random sample. I'm dropping my cursor in here. Okay, it's mostly just drums. Now I also have my volume down. Okay, the band played live that day. I can hear guitar. And also, if memory serves, the bass went direct. So he may not have been playing live in the room. He may not have had an amp. He was just hearing himself in his headphones. And likewise with the keys, it was a synthesizer, not just a standard piano. All right, so let's go back. We've got all of our tracks are, I unsoloed the room. All of our tracks have been amplified to 0. That means that the loudest point in that track, for in this case, like the room mic, it looks like the loudest point was right here where I'm selecting. And it basically, it brought up the amplitude of the entire wave until that loudest point hit 0. Now, I could go into the positive. I could exceed that, but all that's going to happen with the wave, and let's look and see what happens. I'm going to select, I just zoomed in, Control, mouse wheel. I'm selecting it again. We can zoom all the way into the waveform. Okay, so we see this wave on the room mic. It peaks. That's the loudest point in the whole song. That little wave touched right there. So if I went to amplify it, it's already peaked out. But if I wanted to say, boom, I'm just going to go crazy over the top. Notice I can't hit OK. I have to say allow clipping. That means I am telling Audacity, yes, I know that I exceeded 0. I exceeded the maximum allowed amplitude. Allow that. Okay, let's see what happens. So let's zoom in on our wave. You see it exceeds it. It goes beyond it in all these places. It just went off the charts. And what it's going to sound like, sorry, I hit my playback before I announced that. It's just really loud and it's distorted. That's what distortion means, literally distorted. It distorted the signal. It changed the wave from this curve to a flat. It clipped it. And that's where we get the term clipping, is it clipped off the wave. It was smooth, but now it's been changed to where it's just a flat wave on top. That's no good. So I'm going to hit Control Z, undo. Let's go and hear it. It's hard to tell from that little example. Let's go down here. I'm going to zoom in on, I'm just going to select a section of bass track down here. And if I hit play, it's only going to play the selected region. Sorry, let me solo that. Okay, you can probably barely hear that because I forgot to turn it up again. Derp. Okay, now you hear that distortion. I went over the top. I'm going to set it to 0. And now I'm going to play it. All right. A lot of low end, a lot of bass. Now what I'm going to recommend that you do, I'll try to warn you before I play back anything loud and distorted. I'm going to save us the trouble right now. I'm going to turn the gain down over here, the volume. Okay, it's really quiet. Now I'm going to amplify just this section of the bass. If I do it now, it's going to bring it all up to 0. I'm going to go well above that. I'm going to go to 12. Actually, it didn't let me. I forgot to hit the OK button. I'm going to hit 12 and allow clipping. Not too bad, actually. So let's do it again. I'm going to go a ridiculous amount. Okay, so that distortion there is literally the waves getting chopped off. I'm going to hit undo, undo. I'm not going to play any more loud stuff now, okay? So if I scared you there or you didn't get your speakers down in time, I'm not going to do that anymore. Intentionally. So now let's go back to the beginning of the song. The way you do that is up here on we call this the transport. Up the top left, that's your pause, play, stop, rewind, fast forward, and record. I'm going back to the beginning of the song. Or I could hit Shift Home. I'm hitting play.
Can we keep rolling? Yeah, cool. All right.
I'm going to view my mixer. Pulling down my room mic. Now, I'm not going to make this a tutorial just in drum mixing, but you can learn a lot about everything else by simply trying to get drums together. There's so much there, like volume, panning, amplitude, all this stuff. So right now, all we're really listening to are the overhead left and right. In fact, I'm going to just mute everything else so that's not an issue.
Can we keep rolling? Yeah, cool. All right.
Skip ahead. Now, as a rule of thumb, when you're mixing drums, if you have overhead mics on it, then I'm readjusting this so we can see the mixer and the tracks all together. If it'll let me. The bulk of what your drum sound comes from those overheads, and the other close mics that we put on it, like there's a mic on either side of the drums, and that's getting what we hear here. And now we also have mics close to certain drums, certain more critical drums, in this case like a snare. Oh. And the kick drum. And essentially all we're going to do is bring those up to taste. So those are there to just accentuate. So there's a big misconception a lot of times that and especially in the studios, that whenever you hear, whenever you want to get sounds off of an instrument, you just cram the microphone as close as you can get it. And that's obvious. A lot of times just couldn't be further from the truth. You want a more nuanced approach than that. So let's see. let's go back to our overheads. Oh. So now I'm going to, I've got my overheads on. I'm going to unmute my snare. And you can tell already the drum, or sorry, the guitar is bleeding because they were in the same room together. It was bleeding into the snare. So down the road, when we're adjusting the guitar, it's going to affect the snare sound a little bit, and or the snare is going to affect the drum, the guitar tone. I'll get it right in a second, a little bit. So, you know, all that kind of fun stuff. And then I'm going to add my kick drum. And that just gives it a little definition. There's a lot of time there. Okay, so we just heard a ba-doom tom mic. Doing toms, they don't get played that often, so you kind of have to look for them. So I'm going back up to my waveforms, and I'm looking for my toms. Aha. I can take a wild guess as to when the toms are being played in the song by simply looking at that wave file. So I'm going to hold down Control, scroll, and look for a tom hit. Put my cursor there, I just clicked on it. Okay, it was not the tom 1, it was the tom 2. Which is kind of obvious to look at. Alright, so let's bring that tom up. I'm going to play this little section of music. Actually, I'm going to tighten that up some. Just play this little section of music. Alright, so I brought my tom into the mix, but this tom, I don't like it off in the center, so I'm going to pan it off to one side and see what it sounds like. Alright, so now I've got my tom off to the side. So here's a really key element whenever you're mixing sounds together, is that not only is there volume, there's also what we call the stereo image, and that is where in the picture, if you will, the sonic picture, is that instrument. If you mix everything dead center, no panning left and right, you can get decent sounds. You know, if you tweak around, basically AM radio, that's how it is. There's no left and right. It's all boom, right up the center. But you have the option of panning left and right, so use it. And what you can do with panning is it allows more space to put things. So whereas two guitars might sound crowded, if they're both side by side, right dead up the center, simply panning one off to the left and one off to the right makes them distinct and heard better. And you can also bring them down in the mix because they cut through better without being dead center. There's all sorts of little tricks like that, and it just sounds better. It just sounds more natural, like you're not standing listening to a band that's all in a row, boom, boom, boom. They're all standing across like this. And that's from a rock and roll band to an orchestra or whatever. You want to pan it to where your violins are over to the left and your tubas are over to the right, the way they probably are in the orchestra. You want to mimic that image, that stereo image. All right, so moving on ahead, we've got our tom. I'm going to bring in, I'm just using my scroll wheel to move down my tracks. We've got the bass here. I'm going to bring it in. Going back to my mixer. Okay, so if you'll notice, I'm kind of working from the bottom up. I'm working from the back to the front, depending on how you imagine all this stuff. If you think of an ensemble, you've got all the percussion in the back, and it works its way up to the high reeds, winds, and strings. Same in mixing. As a rule of thumb, starting at the back and working to the front, or starting at the low frequencies and working to the high. So you're stacking them on top of each other. If you work the other way around, like if you started with the strings and the vocals and worked your way down, it gets muddy really quickly. So this is a good way to know that you've got plenty of space for your low frequencies to fit, and then you put your higher frequencies within the mix. So moving on forward some more. Guitar. So I'm dragging my fader up and down. Now, if you notice, so every now and then it jumps. I hit my scroll wheel by accident. I can use my scroll wheel to go up and down. And let's see, I think, if I want to do more minor adjustments, I hold down Shift while I drag it. That's very common in audio software. So I want to just fine tune it. But for now, we're just going to drag it around. Sounds fine. Oh, that might require an edit later. Going to the keys. I'm going to just bring them on up a little bit into the mix. Okay, so now I want to listen to my keys. I have two microphones, or two signals for the keys. It's left and right, the lower and the upper end of the keyboard. I want to address those as a single sound now, but I've got all this other sound, so I'm going to go back and mute out everything that I don't want to be hearing, which is everything else, and play back. It's a good keyboard sound, but if you notice, both the left and right mic are dead center, so I'm going to pan it. So just already it just has more breadth to it. So you can essentially think of the piano right now has the sound like it's going all the way across the picture that we're painting. But we also have something else that wants to share that sonic space. Oh, they took a break. All right, so now I've got a guitar as a mono or single track, and I've got the piano as a stereo track, left and right. And I want to treat the stereo track as a single unit. So if I bring down the volume, I'm probably going to do it on both of them equally. But I don't want them like here on top of each other. I want them panned out a little bit. So I'm going to take the left side of the piano, move it to the center, and I'm going to move the guitar over kind of to the left side. Let's listen to that. I'm changing my selection range. Okay, so now we can hear both the piano and the guitar a little more clearly because they're not stepping on each other's toes, spatially. I'm going to unmute the rest of the tracks that we've messed with. All right, now we're kind of hearing the whole band. And honestly, I don't remember what this last track was. So what? Oh, we did a lot of songs that day, and they had a vocal mic up. It's not even used. You can use it for some tricks if you want to. And a lot of times when I'm doing mixes, if I have an extra, in this case, it's essentially another room mic that's just picking up everything. It's just a little bit the whole shebang. So I could use this track and like put a lot of reverb on it and then adjust my reverb. Let's just do that. I'm going to this is the whole band, or at least the parts of the band that were playing live in the room, which is the drum and guitar. So I'm going to double click my vocal track, which is actually just a room mic. I'm going to go up here and click the Fit Project to Width magnifying glass. Make sure everything's selected. And now I'm going to apply some echo, some reverb. So literally just come down here to reverb. Now, this is what I don't like about Audacity. There's no perfect software, and this is amazing software, but the preview doesn't really help out a lot, because what we just heard was 5 seconds of the track, which means it started from the very beginning of my selection and let us hear the reverb that we're about to apply to it. So I'm canceling out of that. I want to hear an actual part of the song. So I'm going to select this range here. And remember, we're only going to hear 5 seconds, so it's just going to start somewhere like... So let me find a better range. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I have more than 5 seconds. Going to go to Effects, Reverb, preview it. Bring that track up. Sorry, cancel, bring that track up because you're not hearing it very well. Effect, reverb. So that's kind of a, I don't know if you could tell, I'm going to make it ridiculous. Here it is without the reverb, for a small size. So this is what we call real-time processing, or actually the lack thereof. Usually, like in professional audio software, you can listen to this anywhere in the track in real time and change it in real time, rather than listening to a sample with it applied and then deciding, is that it, what I don't want. So that's one of the limitations of this software. But once you do figure it out, it applies it well. So I'm just going to pick some, actually I'm going to make this wet only. Wet is the actual effect. Dry is the signal without any effect. So when you hear audio terms talk about wet and dry, it's dry is what you started with, and wet is the absolute most you can affect it with that effect. So if we just listen to wet only, okay, I'm going to go with wet only because what we'll be able to do is have a track that's just wet reverb, and we can bring it in and out to our taste. So we can kind of have real-time changes in reverb in our mix if we want to do that. So I'm not going to apply it yet because remember, we only have a portion selected. It will only apply reverb to that selection. I'm canceling, double-click everything, effect, reverb. It's going to pull up my last settings, hit OK, and now it's going to go through the whole track and apply reverb, which made it much quieter. So I'm going to double-click that track, hit A, or go to Effects, Amplify, and amplify it back to 0 again. Now remember, we're still soloed out. All we're listening to is this track that's called Vox, vocal track, which is actually a room mic. So I'm going to take off the solo. Now we're listening to our full mix, and our vocal track now is essentially reverb. So I pull it down, pull it up. And this is used a lot in a lot of recordings, this kind of effect. And what I could do is that other room mic, which is essentially the same thing, I could put a different reverb and then pan one reverb to the left, one off to the right. I don't know. Back in the late 60s, they had field day with this. Go listen to things like the Shondells, Crimson and Clover. Listen to that with headphones on. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. There was some stereorific tricks going on there. You really hear it in headphones. So we've brought up all the individual tracks. We add a little reverb, kind of blended it. This is what I'm just going to drop the needle at a random spot, hit play. And we could keep going, well, ad infinitum, honestly. There's little things that I would be compelled to address right now, like the guitar, for one. The guitar track is very spiky. So every now and then he'll do stuff. So at some points, this guitar track's really quiet, and then bam, it spikes in there. Well, this is exactly the time we would use a plugin called a compressor. So I go to my effects, and right there it is, compressor. Now this is something that's a lot of times you'll find amplifiers with this built in there, PA, like the public address stuff, that with a mixer it'll have a compressor on there. And sometimes it's as simple as a button. Turn the compressor on, turn it off. And it gives you no adjustments. Sometimes they're like what we're seeing here, where you've got quite a few adjustments. And some compressors have like hundreds of little buttons on there. So it's not just a one-trick pony, but the key elements to it are the threshold, which we see here, that's at what volume level will the compressor start compressing. Essentially, that's saying if this is as quiet as we get and this is as loud as we get, we're going to set a threshold in here. So any sound that's down here, that's going bump, bum, thump, bum, will not get affected. But if suddenly it goes thump, ba-dum, it does something that gets louder than this, whatever threshold we've set, well, everything above that threshold will be affected. Or in this case, it will be compressed. Okay, so here's a little math for you. If we want to start with 0, remember 0 is the loudest we can get. We're going to say that everything that's, for the simplicity of math, anything that stays below -10, that means it never comes up to 10 decibels from 0. Anything that stays below -10 is not going to get affected. We could turn the compressor on, and as long as it's a quiet track, the compressor does nothing. But if there is a sound that exceeds -10, such as goes up to -9, -8, then the compressor will compress that signal. All right? Now, how much is it going to compress it down? Well, that's what's called our ratio. And if you see here right now, the default on this setting, on this compressor, is 3:1. So what that means is if the threshold is -10 and the sound makes it up to -9, -8, -7, it's going to compress it 3 decibel units down to 1 decibel unit, which means the sound went in all the way up to -7 decibels, but it got compressed down to -9. Okay, did you follow that? Anything over 10, and since we're working with negative numbers, that means the numbers get smaller. So anything over 10, if it goes up to -7 decibels, it's going to smash it down to where it only gets up to -9. That means it took off 10, 9, 8, 7, 3 decibels. It made it 1 decibel's worth. So if the sound went up to let's say, negative, again, for simple math, if it went up to -4, that's 987,654, that it went up by 6 decibels beyond the threshold, well, it's only going to let it go 2 decibels above the threshold. So it's going to take -4 decibels and compress it down to -8, 2 decibels above the threshold. That's what a compressor does. You don't have to. It can be mind-bending if you're not. You either you get it or you don't. You've got to sit there. We can talk about it more if I did a poor job of explaining it there. I would be happy to go in further. So right now, what I've told you begs a few questions. Well, what are these decibels? If I put a compressor on it, how loud is it at a given point? Now, one of the things you can do is come over here and zoom in on your WAV file. I'm holding down Control while I'm over the readout down here. And now, if you'll notice, it's showing everything in sine wave format, so that it's the highest it can get is 1, a +1, and lowest it can get is a -1. Yet another way things are measured, and we can go through. Yeah, we can look at this in different. Here we go. Now we're in waveform in decibels. So now this gives me a better idea. I'm going to zoom in on an area and say, I see it's pretty frequently getting up to here, which is around -20. I can zoom in, and depending on where I put my cursor, it will zoom to that location. So it's very frequently getting around the -20 range, and occasionally spikes up beyond that. So for preview purposes, I'm going to select a spiky range and a quiet range. See it get louder and louder and louder through here. I'm going to hit Effect, Compressor, and preview this. Now, if you're not used to compressors, you may not follow what's happening here. So I'm going to find a more okay, right here's 5 seconds. They just stopped playing. So I'm going to use that and listen to our compressor. I'm going to set the threshold all the way to the top. Basically, it's not going to do anything. Preview it. Okay, so now I'm going to lower that threshold really far down. So is completely compressing or not compressing at all. So I'm going to find a happy medium, and I'm going to crank up the ratio here. I'm trying to find something that's like hyper obvious. And this is what mixing is. It's a lot of listening to stuff like that over and over and over. I'll find a better example later, but right now I'm going to double click the entire track, Effect, Compress, A, B, C, D, E, F. I'm going to set my threshold. I saw that in the 20s is where it usually was hitting. I'm going to mitigate my compression amount a little bit, and I'm just going to hit OK. Also notice that this is going, after it's compressed it, one of the features here is it's going to bring it back up to 0, because I'm going to untick, bring up to 0, so you see exactly what happens after this is done. It really didn't get in there. You can't tell a whole lot there, but that's the difference. So that's what happened. You can see how it compressed it there. It was very subtle, but it made some changes. And that will help keep those spikes under control that were such a problem a while ago. I'm going to undo. I'm going to go to my effects and do the compressor again, except this time I'm going to hit make up gain to 0 after compressing. So now it's going to compress it and then re-amplify it. So it did two things for me.
Can we keep rolling? Yeah. Cool. All right.
So now my guitar track's going to overall be a little bit louder. I'm going to have to pull it back a little bit. And notice if I mute it, we're hearing it through the room mic, the reverb. So now we're getting some nice, smooth, easy listening jazz going on there. There's a ton of effects on here. I would be delighted to talk about any and all of these. I would very much encourage you to play with them all before we get into it. But there's so much you can do with this software. But just experiment around with it. And if you mess up, hey, you know how to start over again. It's a great way to learn stuff. How to bring in the track again once you've accidentally deleted that track or you've moved it. How do you get it back to where you want it? And we can get more detailed stuff in there. So to wrap up this particular tutorial, let's say we're happy with this. Oh, yeah. And we want to share it with someone. How? Well, we need to export it. We can't just send them this Audacity file. They wouldn't know what to do with it, most people. So we have to export it. So we go to File, Export, and then we pick our export format. We can go with a WAV if you don't want to have any digital compression. You can go as MP3 or OGG. OGG is a lot like an MP3. I believe it came out of the Unix operating system there. And some of these others, if you go to export audio, it will give you yet more options to export as. And then, standard export procedure, give it a name, put it somewhere that you can find it, and that's great. So I'm going to export, File, Export. That's the project I've been working on. Let's see, I'm going to UTM, MS-31, Silver Spoons, that's this place. The Flying Nun. I'm going to call it Mix Down. It's going to mix it all down as one stereo file. That's good. That's what we're shooting for, right? So I'm going to go back to that file, double check it. Did I ever save this project? Oh my goodness, I committed a cardinal sin. I never hit save right off the get-go. So I'm going to save my Audacity. I'm trying to think of 5 things at once. The Flying Nun. I'm going to save it. Holy cow. I never saved it. Bad me. Okay, so I saved my Audacity file. Silver Spoons, The Flying Nun, Mix Down. Let's listen to it.
Can we keep rolling? Yeah. Cool.
Okay, already I hear a problem because we didn't trim the tails and the head. But we're going to talk about that next time. All right, well, I hope this hasn't put you to sleep too quickly. And if you have any questions whatsoever, let's talk about it. All right, I'll see you around next time.